During an expedition in Antarctica, the scientists unexpectedly discovered an emaciated polar bear, which had likely starved to death. Not far away, in the snowy landscape, they also found an extraordinary discovery, a thawed-out ancient woolly mammoth carcass. To conduct in-depth research, the scientists set up a field camp with tents right on site. However, it wasn't long before strange events began to occur within the team. A frail, sickly colleague fell gravely ill first and ultimately chose to end his own life in agonizing pain. The team's sole female scientist, Amy, soon fell seriously ill. The veteran researchers suspected the team had been infected by an unknown virus and sealed their deceased teammate's body before burying it. However, the virus continued to rapidly spread through the group. Amy began experiencing vomiting, severe hallucinations, and paranoia, believing someone was trying to harm her. Without hesitation, she decided to take preemptive action. However, Amy's misfortune did not end with the killing of her teammates. The colleague she had just killed had, unbeknownst to her, recently contacted a renowned university and arranged for 4 university students, including his own daughter Sarah, to come to the base for an internship. Upon arriving at the base as scheduled, the students found it without power or water and eerily abandoned, with a faint yet foul odor lingering in the air. As Alan placed his hand on the polar bear carcass to take a black and white selfie, a sudden sharp pain shot through his exposed arm. He had been bitten by something. Thinking it was just fleas from the bear, Alan didn't pay much attention to it. However, that night Alan noticed his arm was infected and unbearably itchy. Despite the discomfort, the careless Alan simply bandaged it up and went to sleep. The next day, he finally checked the bandage only to find it was soaked in black blood, and the wound had started to fester. When a teammate came to speak with him, Alan hastily rewrapped the bandage, trying to forget about the issue. It wasn't until he saw the rotting polar bear corpse in the lab, with horrifying worms crawling out of it, that he realized the gravity of the situation. Removing the bandage, he found his wound was now severely necrotic, with larvae about to hatch from it. But in this remote field station, there were no medical professionals or proper medical facilities. Desperate to save his own life, Alan grabbed an unsterilized small knife and forcefully pried open the necrotic wound. Sure enough, a live worm emerged, only to quickly burrow back into the flesh. Everyone was terrified, unsure of what to do. Snapping back to action, Alan decisively retrieved a shiny kitchen knife from a drawer and placed it on the table. His teammates were immediately petrified, eyes wide and heads shaking in dismay. Seeing this, Alan sat down on a chair, realizing he would have to take matters into his own hands. Despite the agonizing pain, the teammates had no choice but to acquiesce. However, they decided they must first make thorough preparations before proceeding. Afterward, they first injected Alan with a high dose of anti-inflammatory medication, then used bandages to bind the major artery. But even after aiming for some time, Andre still hesitated to bring down the kitchen knife in his hand. Finally, it was Sarah who took action, making several cuts. As a result, Alan lost an entire arm, but his life was temporarily spared. After a basic bandaging, the teammates worked together to carry Alan to the sofa. As Sarah opened the first aid kit to further dress the wound, she suddenly discovered a notebook belonging to the late doctor, which detailed the origins of the worms. It turned out this was a species of vertebrate, where the males were harmless and would die off naturally after biting, but the females would burrow into living hosts to lay their eggs. This was the truly deadly part. The situation had escalated far beyond the young team's comprehension. After some discussion, they decided to rest overnight and then fly out the next day. But in the middle of the night, Sarah was jolted awake by a loud rumbling noise. At this critical time, someone had arrived. But when she rushed outside, she only found an idling motorcycle with no one in sight. It wasn't until she approached the helicopter parked on the lawn that she made a discovery. Sarah called her teammates to help carry the unconscious Amy back to the base. They found an uncovered camera on her, but as they tended to her, Amy's condition suddenly worsened. She started vomiting green fluid. In a brief moment of lucidity, Amy repeatedly apologized to Sarah before succumbing to death. As Sarah tried to revive her, the teammates held her back. It was clear that Amy had been infected by the unknown virus, and attempting to resuscitate her would have only caused more harm. Realizing her earlier actions were too rash, Sarah understood that forcibly reviving Amy was unwise. In order to uncover the source of the virus and investigate the disappearance of her father and the others, the group decided to head to the remote field station. However, they were shocked to discover that the plane's flight path had been deliberately sabotaged, undoubtedly Amy's doing before her death. Perplexed by this, they decided to trace Amy's route back on her motorcycle, which had a tracking device that could guide them to where she had departed from. After a group discussion, it was decided that Sarah and Bart would go investigate the mystery. Following the tracking device, they soon located the remote field station. But as they approached, they discovered the bodies of the scientific expedition team. They had been gunned down. Not far away, Sarah also spotted a freshly buried corpse, immediately fearing it was her father. She couldn't understand why the infected Amy had also resorted to brutally killing her teammates. It wasn't until they looked inside the tent that the answer became clear. A long-haired, prehistoric woolly mammoth-like creature, frozen for 1,000,000 years, had been thawed out due to global warming. Approaching the mammoth carcass, Sarah and Bart were shocked to find it teeming with mysterious eggs. Realizing the implications, a panicked Sarah rushed back to the base and discovered her infected teammate's body was also covered in the same parasitic eggs. Seeing living larvae crawling on the eyelids, the group quickly wrapped the body in a sheet and transferred it to the lab, placing it alongside the polar bear carcass. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Sarah rushed to the communications room, intending to contact the disease control center and contain the virus. However, teammate Charlie suddenly went berserk, shooting up the radio equipment, claiming he had already called for helicopter rescue that would arrive in a few hours. He didn't want to risk any complications that could cost lives, as he was well aware of his own deteriorating condition. Just recently, Charlie had discovered blood in his pants and urine, accompanied by unexplained pain in his groin. Initially, he thought it was from his girlfriend Ling, but seeing her rapidly worsening state made him realize they had both been infected. Lifting Ling's shirt, Sarah confirmed the presence of parasitic eggs in her body. Exchanging a resigned look, the teammates had no choice but to isolate the severely ill Ling in a room. During the night, they found scattered worms emerging from Ling's isolated room, though Bart was able to stomp them out. It was clear the infection was spreading from Ling's room. Isolated, Ling was suffering a fate worse than death, but the group dared not release her. Looking at his struggling girlfriend, Charlie felt a mix of pity and overwhelming despair.
You have them too!
Fearing his own secret would be exposed, the horrified Charlie suddenly drew his gun and shot his girlfriend, claiming she had requested it. Outraged, Alan saw through the broken glass that Ling was still clinging to life. He grabbed 2 vials of anti-inflammatory medication from his teammates and rushed into the room. Though he lost an arm in the process, Alan's attempt to save Ling was ultimately unsuccessful. Accepting death rather than waiting for it to come, he chose not to burden the living any further. The successive deaths and betrayals of their teammates had the survivors teetering on the edge of collapse. It was then that Sarah discovered a roll of film, connecting it to the uncovered camera found on Amy. Driven by a strong curiosity to uncover the truth behind the virus outbreak, Sarah knew she had to risk venturing into the lab overrun by the parasitic creatures. After taking extensive protective measures, Sarah quietly entered the lab. But when she peeled back the blood-stained sheet, she was horrified to find the body reduced to mere bones, gnawed on by the swarming worms. Steeling herself, Sarah managed to retrieve the camera, even as the creatures rapidly surrounded her. As the woman emerged from the lab, she quickly peeled off her protective gear. Turning around, her teammates spotted a worm preparing to burrow into an exposed wound on her waist. One of them swiftly grabbed the worm's tail and yanked it out, crushing it underfoot. However, the other teammate, still wary of potential infection, forcibly stripped Sarah down at gunpoint, demanding a full body inspection to ensure her safety. Forced to comply to save herself, a humiliated Sarah had to undress completely in front of the 2 young men. After a meticulous 3-hour examination that confirmed she was clear of any parasites, a reluctant Charlie finally allowed Sarah to leave. After getting dressed, Sarah tried to inspect Charlie in return to confirm he was uninfected. However, Charlie suddenly became agitated. Realizing there was no need to hide it anymore, he openly admitted to being infected, believing those before him were as good as dead anyway and nothing could stop his desire to escape. Unexpectedly, the doctor, who was thought to have died earlier, appeared on the scene. He instructed the 2 to go fetch gasoline from the base, intending to burn everything down. As they were pouring the gasoline, Sarah sensed something was off. Returning to the lab, she finally opened the camera they had retrieved, uncovering the doctor's sinister plot behind the entire incident. The doctor, after years of environmental research, had realized that the greatest threat was humanity's unwillingness to sacrifice present interests for an uncertain future. Believing a significant early sacrifice was needed to awaken the world, he had seized the opportunity presented by the expedition to the melting glaciers, which had revived prehistoric creatures capable of delivering a painful, bloody lesson. To this end, the doctor had intentionally infected himself with ancient parasites, planning to deliberately spread the contagion in order to catalyze the necessary crisis and prevent the impending environmental catastrophe. Knowing the truth had been uncovered, the doctor locked the 2 inside the base and rushed to the arriving rescue helicopter. Falsely claiming everyone was infected, he urged the pilot to take off immediately. The trapped pair refused to give up, escaping through the broken window. Desperate to stop the helicopter, Bart clung to the landing gear, but soon lost his strength. Witnessing this, the determined Sarah grabbed a rifle and, with machine gun-like accuracy, shot down the pilot. As the helicopter crashed, it also destroyed the base, ensuring the ancient parasites would not spread further. In the fall, Bart had unfortunately broken his spine and could not be saved. Taking one last look at the burning base and hearing the ancient parasite's bodies bursting, a resolute Sarah took the backpack containing her father's crucial notes and records, evidence that could awaken the world to the impending crisis. Soon after, the second rescue team arrived and found the surviving Sarah. Though this epic disaster had been temporarily averted, the ancient biological threat had not ended. Unbeknownst to them, a bird infected with parasite eggs had fallen and been picked up by a dog, which then followed its owner back into the human city, setting the stage for the crisis to spread.